Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Reading Corner. I hope that you're having a good day. As usual, I am having a great day because I've got some great books to read to you. One is about a brave little penguin, but when she is faced with a killer whale, what is she going to do? Then we have another story about a brave little red caboose who, even though he is the very last, he always comes at the end of the train, finds out that he's actually very important. And finally, we have a story about a little boy called Andy who finds himself stuck in bed because he's sick. But then something very cool happens to him. So let's start with the bravest little penguin of all and see what happens when she tries to win the Great Penguin Race. In Antarctica, it was the day of the Great Penguin Swim Race. All the penguins were excited, especially one, Little Blue Penguin. I'm going to be the first little blue penguin ever to win this race, she said. Goodness gracious, said Emperor Penguin. You're much too small to win. Indeed, said King Penguin, sniffing the salty air. A champion needs to be big, like me. And me, said Macaroni Penguin as he puffed out his white chest. But Little Blue Penguin was determined. I can do it, she whispered to herself, and tobogganed to the starting line at the edge of the bay. Gannet Bird swooped down and perched on a rocky ledge. Ready, Penguin, she squawked. On your marks, get set, go! And the penguins dived into the icy sea with a huge splash. The bigger penguins leapt in and out of the water, splashing and splattering Little Blue Penguin. Out of my way, shouted Emperor Penguin. Catch me if you can, chuckled King Penguin. You'll never make it, said Macaroni Penguin. But Little Blue Penguin was determined. I can do it, she whispered to herself, and swam even faster. The crowd of penguins cheered and cheered. But suddenly, the cheering stopped. There was an eerie silence. Little Blue Penguin felt something was wrong, so she paddled to the nearest iceberg and hopped on. What is that monstrous black lump? She asked. Oh, squawked Gannet Bird as she swooped down to land on the iceberg. It's a whale. Little Blue Penguin stared and stared. It's not just a whale, she said. It's a killer whale. I must warn the others, said Little Blue Penguin, and dived off the iceberg. She torpedoed through the water. Danger, danger, cried Little Blue Penguin. There's a killer whale right behind us. Uh-oh, he's coming for us, cried King Penguin with a quivering beak. Help, cried Emperor Penguin, huffing and puffing in fear. What are we going to do? Asked Macaroni Penguin. Little Blue Penguin paddled in front of them. Everything will be all right, she promised. But everything was not all right. The killer whale leapt out of the sea and hit the water with a gigantic smack. With wide, snapping jaws, he circled the penguins. But Little Blue Penguin called out, Hey, killer whale, she said, watch this. And she ducked underwater. What was Little Blue Penguin up to? Emperor Penguin was almost too afraid to peek. King Penguin was afraid to peek, and Macaroni Penguin could only watch. The Little Blue Penguin started spinning round and round and round and made a mighty whirlpool. The killer whale's eyes spun round and round and round. He grew dizzier and dizzier and dizzier. Then Little Blue Penguin crept onto the killer whale's back. She stuck her beak into his ear, took a deep breath, and let out a thundering boo. The killer whale was terrified, so terrified that he zigzagged off in the opposite direction. Emperor Penguin leapt for joy. King Penguin rejoiced and cried penguin tears. Macaroni Penguin was just amazed. Little Blue Penguin paddled back to shore. By now, the entire colony of penguins had gathered to cheer. Little Blue Penguin to the rescue, they chanted over and over again. Gannet Bird ruffled her feathers. Attention, one and all, she squawked. The champion of the great penguin swim race is Little Blue Penguin, the first Little Blue Penguin ever to win this race. And everybody cheered and cheered and cheered. The end. So sometimes being little doesn't mean that you can't be important, as we find out in our next story about the Little Red Caboose. The Little Red Caboose always came last. First came the big black engine, puffing and chuffing. Then came the box cars, then the oil cars, and then the coal cars, then the flat cars. Sometimes they were switched around in different ways, but the Little Red Caboose always came last. Boys and girls waved at the big black engine. They listened to the box cars and the oil cars and the coal cars and the flat cars go clickety-clack. But by the time the Little Red Caboose came along, the boys and girls were turning away because the Little Red Caboose always came last. Oh, smoke, said the Little Red Caboose. I wish I were a flat car or a coal car or an oil car or a box car so boys and girls would wave at me. How I wish I were a big black engine puffing and chuffing away up the top at the front of the train. But I am just the little old red caboose. Nobody cares for me. One day, the train started up a mountain. Up went the big black engine. Up went the box cars. Up went the oil cars. Up went the coal cars. Up went the flat cars. Up went the little red caboose. Hang on tight, little red caboose, called the flat car. This is a long, tall mountain, and you are the last car on the train. Don't I know it, sighed the little red caboose. Poor me. The train went slower and slower and slower. Soon it was hardly moving. It looked as if that train could not get up the mountain. Look out, little caboose, called the flat car. The train is starting to slip back down this long, tall mountain. Not if I can help it, said the little red caboose, and he slammed on his brakes and he held tight to the tracks and he kept that train from sliding down the mountain. Then bump, the little red caboose felt something push him from behind. It was two big black engines. They pushed the train up to the top of the mountain. We couldn't have done it, said the big black engines, if it had not been for the little red caboose. Everyone cheered, and the little red caboose nearly burst with pride. Now Children wave at the big black engine and at all the cars, but they save their biggest waves for the little red caboose, because the little red caboose saved the train. Now that story is a classic because my dad read that to me when I was a little girl, and then I read it to my children when they were small. So it's been around for a long time, but I hope that you love it as much as I loved it when I was a little girl and my children loved it once upon a time. Now we've got another story about something very cool that happens to a little boy when he's stuck in bed sick one day, and it's called Mr. Cool. Poor Andy Robinson wasn't feeling well. He had been in bed for days, and he had to stay in bed until he was better. I'm bored, he huffed. I wish I could go outside and play with my friends. Suddenly, a blue blur shot in through the window. It looped the loop around the light in the ceiling, and a small blue figure wearing a hat landed on the end of Andy's bed. Cool, said Andy. That's me, Mr. Cool, said Mr. Cool. Cool, repeated Andy. You look a bit bored, said Mr. Cool. I thought we could go and have some fun. I wish I could, said Andy, but I'm not allowed out of bed. I think we could make an exception just this once, said Mr. Cool, and he clicked his fingers. The next instant, Andy found himself sitting in the cockpit of a jet plane. Why don't you take it out for a spin, suggested Mr. Cool. What? Can I really fly it? Asked Andy. Sure you can, said Mr. Cool. It's easy. So Andy flew the jet plane out across the Pacific Ocean and back. That was cool, cried Andy when they were back on the ground. Thanks, Mr. Cool. We haven't finished yet, said Mr. Cool, and he clicked his fingers again. Andy heard a crowd roar. He was at a soccer ground, but he wasn't sitting in the crowd. He was on the bench with the other players, and he was wearing the team colour. Quick, said Mr. Cool. The coach wants you to go on. He wants me to play, said Andy in disbelief. They're the number one team. And you'll never guess what? Andy scored the winning goal. Wow, that was so cool, said Andy. As Andy walked off the pitch, Mr. Cool clicked his fingers and whisked them away to climb the tallest tree in the world. He clicked his fingers again, and before you could say Andy Robinson, they were standing on top of a mountain. Where are we? Called Andy over the noise of the howling wind. Mount Everest, said Mr. Cool. How cool! What are we doing here? Shouted Andy. Sledging, said Mr. Cool. Let's go. Andy and Mr. Cool slid from the very top to the very bottom of Mount Everest. That was the coolest thing ever, cried Andy. It was more like the coldest, shouted Mr. Cool, and Mr. Cool clicked his fingers for the final time that day. In an instant, Andy found himself back in his bedroom. Thank you so much, Mr. Cool, said Andy. That was amazing, laughed Mr. Cool. Well, I'll be off, said Mr. Cool, but there's one more thing, Andy. Have a look in the mirror. And with this, Mr. Cool shot out through the window. Andy went into the bathroom and looked in the mirror. Cool, said Andy when he saw himself. And why do you think he was so pleased? That's right. All his spots had gone. Andy was better. I wonder, what page did Andy get better? Would you like to go back and have a look? On top of Mount Everest, Andy still has his spots. Then they go down the mountain, and when they get to the bottom, he's better. That's very cool. I hope that you have a really cool day too, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next time at Reading Corner. Until then, bye for now.